Good morning. Thank you for, I'm just going to start. If people are going to come in. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you choosing this out of all of the million billion choices that you have at this conference. So thank you for coming. I hope I make it worthwhile for you. At the very least, I have presents at the end. So there's that. I would like to talk about pretty much my favorite topic right now, which is the inner critic. And it's such a favorite topic that I actually wrote a book about it, which just came out last week. Woo! Thank you. Thank you very much. So I did do a talk on banishing your inner critic in 2014, but if anybody happened to have been at that talk, just know that I'm actually not going to really talk about anything that I talked about in that talk, and I'm going to talk about new stuff that I talked about in the book. So let's get started. I'm Denise Jacobs. I am a speaker, obviously, an author, obviously, again, and I also started a company called The Creative Dose, which is a creativity consultancy where I go into companies and I give talks and also lead trainings to help people unblock their creativity so they can start to do their best work and also work better together. If you're tweeting, which I hope you do, my Twitter handle is Denise Jacobs. You know the Twitter handle for the conference and the hashtag. And then the hashtag that I've made for the presentation and for the book is #ByInnerCritic. So you can use that. So I want to start off kind of talking about why even bother banishing the inner critic. Like, what's the point? So the problem with the inner critic is that it kind of makes us limited. It actually keeps us smaller and in place. And to kind of illustrate how the inner critic shows up in your life, I'm going to share 3 stories from my own life and kind of the interpretations that I made from them and then how that affected me later on. So when I was 12 years old, I went to a summer camp with my best friend, Emily. There we are at summer camp. And in the summer camp, you know, you have multiple activities and things like that you have to do. And one time we were doing an arts and crafts activity and I ended up drawing a picture of a mermaid when I was 12. So I was super happy with this picture. I was just like, oh yeah. So Emily, by the way, as a little bit of a piece of information, my friend Emily was really, really into comics, and she was really into the X-Men, and she also drew as well, and she would draw these kind of superhero type like people and type women, and so, you know, I would just kind of copied her. And so I drew this mermaid, and I was super psyched about it. And then I mind my business. I'm about to show it to Emily, who's sitting next to me. And this heifer, who's in our group, comes up to the table completely uninvited, comes up, stands over my shoulder, looks at it, and goes, "It looks like a frog." And I was like, okay. This was what I was like inside, but I didn't do this because I didn't have my chops back then. But what I wish I had done was been like, "Oh, really, Bish? What?" But unfortunately, I was 12, and I'm from a small college town. Like, we didn't have tough people. I didn't have tough people to learn from. So instead of being like, "Oh, really, Bish," which I wish I had done, I was more like this inside. Like, I thought I could draw. And so from that experience, even though it was completely unprovoked, and, there's a lot of people who are adults who can't draw that kind of thing. So I'm kind of like, I was doing okay for a 12-year-old, right? But even still, the thought that I had was, maybe I'm not as good at drawing as I thought it was. Then let's move forward a little bit in time to where I'm about 13 or 14. So For the people who are far away and can't tell, I am 6'1" in imperial measurement and 185 centimeters in metric. I'm a very tall woman, and I was always very tall. I grew very early, and so when I was 13, I was 5'11", about 2 inches shorter than I am now. And so I had played basketball earlier in my childhood and then fell out with some of the girls on the basketball team, decided I wasn't going to play, waited a couple of years, and then all the girls on the team were like, you need to play with us again, you would be so good, it would be so great if you can. And I said, okay, fine. So I decided to go ahead and play basketball. There was just one problem. I wasn't very good. As a matter of fact, I was just so-so. Everybody else had played for an additional 2 years. They had built up their skill. I hadn't. So what do you think the expectation is for a tall black girl playing basketball? Exactly. And I wasn't that person. And so what did I do during the games? I hid. I was absolutely terrified to go and play on the floor. My coach, in fact, would call me, and so my coach would be at the end of the bench like this, and she would lean down and she'd go, Denise! And I would be like this. And I'd get up and I'd be like, Miss Canine, I'm not ready. I'm so not ready. Put me in at the end of the game. I'll be ready then. And I would beg and plead and cajole her to not play me in the games. Why? Because I was so afraid of being judged. I was tall. I was kind of like gangly. I had really long arms and really long legs and kind of was like round in the middle. And I was certain that people would either judge me for not being as good a basketball player as they expected me to be, or they would judge me for being like a tall, awkward, gangly young woman. I was like, I'm not here for that. I hid. So that's what also happened. And then moving forward a little bit longer in time to when I'm 24, 10 years later, a lot of things happened in 10 years. I graduated from University of Washington. My parents came to my graduation, and I was having a conversation with my father, and he was like, what do you think you want to do after you graduate? And I was like, well, I don't know. I think I might like to be a writer. Now, there's backstory to this. I had done a very competitive program in international studies where writing was a really strong requirement. I had had professors take me aside and say, you're a really good writer. I had one professor say, you're such a good writer, I want you to come and actually tutor other people at the writing center. I was like, okay. And then I had another one who said to me later on, actually much later after the fact, said to me, I thought you were going to be a professor of political science. So my thinking that I might be a writer, beside the fact that I liked it, was not completely unfounded. But my father, being my father, was trying to protect me, and he said this to me. Do you know how hard it is to get published? Now, let me say a couple of things about my dad. My dad was no joke, okay? My father was the first person in his family to graduate from college. He got a degree in aeronautical engineering. He built experimental aircraft for fun. I grew up with an airplane fuselage in the garage instead of a car, literally. He also decided to go back to school because he didn't want to work for anybody else and get his doctor of optometry degree and became an optometrist. My father was not a person who sat around and talked about how the man kept him down or anything like that and talked about how there's limitations all the time, right? That was not my father. He broke through barriers so much in his own life. And yet, despite that, my father still played into the belief, the cultural belief, that artists starve, right? That creativity is something that you do for fun in your free time and not as a job, and that very few writers get published. And I took his information to heart. I was very, insecure. I was unsure about my future. And I took his information to heart and started to believe getting published is really hard. I should just forget about being a writer. All of these things add up, right? All of these pieces of information that we get from people, all of this misinformation comes together, adds up, and kind of multiplies and becomes the inner critic. The problem is that in order for us to be creative, we need to silence the inner critic. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I feel like creativity is actually a source of power. So like I was saying, these negative things that we've heard, plus the fears that we have about ourselves, right? The fears that we kind of have, and then somebody says something and it triggers that fear, and then we go, oh, that fear is true, and then we make it true, right? All of that ends up equaling the inner critic. And the inner critic is actually helped by a couple of other psychological pieces. Something called negativity bias, and also something called fear conditioning. So negativity bias, by the way, is anybody here afraid of snakes? That looks like a no, like a couple of people, like a few people. Okay, I was trying to figure out what to use for negativity bias. But so negativity bias is basically the brain's natural ability to scan for danger, right? So thousands of years ago, when we were hunter and gatherers, we actually had to scan for danger. If danger appeared, for example, if a snake came out of the bushes somewhere where we were gathering food, you were going to actually really glom on mentally to the fact that you saw a snake in that area. And if you saw something beautiful in the same area, you saw a beautiful bird or you saw a butterfly or something like that, your brain would be like, that's nice, but that's snake, right? And that piece of information would go into a piece of your brain because of something called fear conditioning, would go into a part of your brain, go into something called implicit memory, which is this memory that you use automatically, right? It's the memory that is the basis of habits. So that you know that when you go back to that area, that you need to be aware that there's potential danger, that there's snakes. You won't be running around going, I hope I see another butterfly. You'll be like, I want to make sure there's no snakes, right? That's negativity bias and fear conditioning. So like I said, it goes into implicit memory, goes into this place in our brains that says, okay, this is something that I'm just not going to have to think about that much. I know it's there. It's important. And it also largely affects our subconscious. But the problem is that sort of thing, if you hear a criticism from somebody, if you feel judged by somebody or something like that, that also will go into the implicit memory. Those things, I'm telling you about it, that was like 40 years ago. That little bitch is still in my head, right? By saying that. Now, I know I can actually draw. It's okay. She was just having a moment, bless her heart. But it's still there, and it goes past conscious memory, goes into subconscious thinking, and then it affects our habits and behaviors. And really, in my mind, most importantly, that's what ends up blocking our creativity. Like I said, creativity is power. How many of you guys have been in a flow state? Like a serious, deep flow state. What did it feel like when you were in the flow state? Great. Okay. Be more specific. More. Tell me more. Bliss. What else? Fast. What else? All you guys raised your hands, so you can say something. Yeah. Time flew by. Absolutely. What else? Empowered. Yes. What else? Anything else? Productive. Right? Empowered. Time flew by. Bliss. Productive. Right? If that's not power, if that's not tapping into a source of power, I don't know what is, right? And I feel like being creative and being able to get into that creative flow state is one of the easiest ways that we can tap into our own personal power. The problem is that when we start to succumb to the inner critic, we end up giving our power away, right? That power, that ability, that capacity, that access, we end up like relinquishing it for these awful ideas that aren't even true. Because let's think about it. This chick, Heather, at school, my mermaid did not look like a frog, it looked like a mermaid. She might have been jealous that she couldn't draw like that. I don't know why she did it. Truth is that I ended up actually playing basketball. I'll tell you about it later. And then the other thing is that obviously it's not that hard to get published, because if it was, I wouldn't be published right now, right? So the good news is, so that's the bad news. The good news is that we have mental power tools that we came with out of the box. We've got capacities, mental capacities that we can use to actually counter the inner critic. Now, this is the part actually of the book that I felt the most excited about, because for a long time I would talk about all of these things to banish the inner critic, and I didn't actually know why it worked. I'm just telling you guys now because we're friends. I didn't actually know why it worked. But then when I started doing research for this book, I started to understand why it works and why actually some of this stuff is really powerful. For one, there's neuroplasticity. Our brains have the capacity to change over time, continuously throughout our life, as long as we give it the proper stimulus. So, neuroplasticity is actually driven by attention. Whatever you put your attention on, that is what your brain is going to expand upon. That's what your brain is going to put resources towards. That's what it's going to build neurons and neuronal connections with. And that's what is actually going to make your brain expand or contract. So if you spend a lot of time with your inner critic leading the show and it telling you, you can't do this, you don't know enough of that, why can't you, you should have, etc., then that part of your brain is going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. Whereas if you start focusing on other things, every time you're aware that you're doing that, you say, okay, and you focus someplace else, then you will actually start to, that part of your brain will actually start to, it's actually, there's something called synaptic pruning, that your brain will actually go through and start, those connections won't be as strong, and they'll get replaced by other ones that are stronger. Pretty cool, I think. The other tool that we have is mindfulness. So being mindful basically means just being aware, right? Paying attention, being more aware of your thoughts, and then again, making a deliberate choice and saying, I'm thinking these thoughts, but I'm actually going to choose to think other ones. Now, there's something called thought stopping. Thought stopping doesn't work. When you say to yourself, I'm not going to think that. What happens when you're not going to think that? Don't think about a pink elephant. Don't think about it. Don't think about a pink elephant. I forbid you to think about a pink elephant. What are you thinking about? Exactly. That's why thought stopping doesn't work. But if you say, okay, I could think about a pink elephant, but I'd rather think about a blue one. All of a sudden, you're not thinking about a pink elephant. You're thinking about a blue elephant because you made a choice, right? So mindfulness is about being aware of what you're thinking and then deciding to do something else if need be. And then the other power tool that we have is self-compassion. So self-compassion is actually really a lot more powerful than people think. They think it's like, oh, well, you just have to think nice thoughts. Actually, one of the kind of tenets of self-compassion, there's a really great book by an author named Kristin Neff, who wrote the book on self-compassion. But self-compassion actually has a large kind of litany of attributes and things that it helps. It helps with grit, it helps with resiliency, it actually helps you be happier. But self-compassion basically kind of boils down to first recognizing that you're suffering, like that, for example, in the case of the inner critic, that thinking these thoughts is really unpleasant and it doesn't feel good. And then also basically treating yourself with the same kind of care and compassion that you would somebody else who is actually suffering or hurting. So I call this the self-compassion template. If you think about, if somebody who was a friend was just like, oh my God, I am having the worst day. And then they just start running down all of these awful things about themselves. I'm such a loser. I did this. I messed up on that, and blah, blah, blah. And what would you probably do? You'll probably be like, whoa, wait. Why are you beating up on yourself? You're fine. You're okay. Look, you did this, and you did this. You're fine, right? But when it comes to ourselves, what do? Oh my God, you're such a loser, and you don't know enough, and you're that, and you need to do this, and you need to do that, right? And there's nobody there to come in and run interference and do an intervention. So self-compassion is doing that same thing for yourself. So the other thing that you can do, so you've got neuroplasticity on your side. You know that if you pay attention to one thing over another, that it will change what your brain does, right? Mindfulness, same kind of thing, that you have the choice, the option to choose one thought over another one, right? And then self-compassion, you also have the option to be kinder to yourself, to be nicer to yourself, the same way that you would with somebody else who is in a hard position, who's suffering, who's not feeling well, who's being mean to themselves, right? Another thing that you can do with the inner critic is you need to recognize the inner critical voice. So I gave you examples of it, but I have an exercise. You don't have to do it now. This is just something for you to look at. But if you're kind of like, I don't really have an inner critic. I actually had a friend. It just kind of cracks me up every time I think about it. I have a friend who is from Switzerland. She spent a lot of time in the UK getting a degree in midwifery, and now she is in Africa in villages, like helping women, like being the midwife for the village, which is amazing, right? She's amazing. She sent me an email, and she said, "Hi, Denise, I don't have an inner critic. I'm not going to buy your book." And I was like, okay, that's fine. I'm not saying everybody needs to buy it, but it's just funny that she said it that way. So some people don't have an inner critic. I get it. It's totally fine. I admire you, and I want to learn at your feet. But for the rest of us who do have it, if you're not familiar with it, what it is, if it's so sublimated and so subtle and so persistent that it's Tuesday, it's like you're not even noticing that it's there, then here's a nice framework for you, some Mad Libs that you can use to try to get to what your inner critical voice. Things like, and you can just fill it in, you can just keep writing them over and over again. If I, for example, go and play basketball in a game, then people will judge me. Right? If I'm not smart enough, right? Or I'm not talented enough, I don't know enough. I can't be a writer because getting published is hard, right? Etc. So you can go through these Mad Libs and fill them in, and you can start to actually get at what some of your mistaken beliefs are. So the inner critic, what I discovered, so I do this exercise. Where are we at? I do this exercise where I give everybody a piece of paper, give them a pen, have them write down on the piece of paper their main fear around creativity, crumble it up in a ball, throw it across the room. People on the other side of the room pick up a thing, look at it, and then everybody starts to see that everybody's got the same kind of issues. So through that, I determined that there are multiple ways that the inner critic shows up. So I'm going to talk about a few of them today. Today I'm going to talk about something that I call creativity denial, when people say, oh my God, I'm totally not creative, I'm analytical, I'm logical, or whatever. To that I say hooey. Hooey is a technical term. Thank you. So 3 Americans over here oh my God, it's hilarious. Thank you, you guys. So, creativity denial, something I call creativity denial. Something that I also called judgment dread, fear of being judged and criticized. Also, something that I call deficiency anxiety, fear that you don't know enough, that you aren't good enough, that you're not talented enough, etc. I also identified something called comparison syndrome, where you're constantly in the process of comparing yourself to other people, that you can't see what you actually have to offer and what you have that's valuable. And then finally, I think that's actually it. So 5 different ones. So let's talk about creativity denial first. So I actually usually talk about this last, but because I'm here at this conference that is a developer conference, I thought, let's just cut to the chase and get to this. Let's just get this one out of the way. How many of you feel like you're creative? Okay, that's a good showing. Excellent. For those of you who don't feel that you're creative, here's the thing. There's a great quote from Bruce Nussbaum, who wrote a book called Creative Intelligence. And what he says is that creativity is all about seeing patterns and making connections. And so I feel like, especially developers are particularly talented at that. Not only that, but I also feel like developers basically do magic, right? Somebody tells you, I want this thing to happen. I want it to look like this. And I want it, when this happens, I want that to happen. And you go, okay. And you sit down and you start writing code to make that thing happen. What? That's crazy. That's super creative. So I invite you, if you don't think you're creative, to start reconsidering that. And also, just give yourself permission and fucking own it, right? So, actually, in the book, I have a download for a creativity permission slip. If you want a creativity permission slip, if you just feel like, I just need somebody else to tell me that I'm creative. Like, I kind of think so, but I need somebody authoritative to tell me. Well, then, look, I have this. You can tell yourself, I give you permission. Go forth and be creative. Be your badass selves, okay? Number 2. Remember that words have power. So there's something that I call imposition mentality. And that is, a lot of times, people talk about this all the time. Oh my God, I'm so slammed. Oh my God, I totally have to do this. Oh my God, I need to do this. It always starts with, oh my God. But seriously, this is the language that we use all the time now. But there's a book called The Now Habit by Neil Fiore, and he says in this book that when you use that kind of language, it is this imposed upon victim mentality, right? So when you do that, start to remember how powerful words are. And so to be able to shift out of imposition mentality, I recommend being very, very thoughtful about your words. When you have a situation where you say something like, I have to, you can say, I choose to, or I will, right? If you say, I should, you can say, I'm going to, right? Take away words like should, ought, must, have to. Those all make it sound like this is imposed upon you, but it is your life. You can switch you can reframe how you work with stuff, and you can actually choose to do stuff, and you can actually show up. Like, you may not like to do it, right? I'm not saying that you're going to enjoy it, but I am saying that you can actually realize that you do have a choice in this and that you can choose it. You're going to have to do it anyway, so choose to do it. If you're suffering from what I call creativity misgivings, where you feel like creativity, yes, kind of, sometimes, can't count on it, don't have enough good ideas, then this is what I recommend. I recommend doing something that James Altucher talks about, which is to become an idea machine. And that is to try to basically work to have 10 ideas a day, to start carrying around a notebook and to start noting down 10 ideas for things. So it could be like a bug list, things that just bug you. It could be in something that you use. It could be in software. It could be a practical thing, just something that bugs you where you're just like, I wish it was like this. And then you can just start writing ideas of what it could be like, right? You can also try to come up with the worst idea that you can come up with. You can also do ideas within a theme, like all things that have to do with water, all things that have to do with the environment, all things that have to do with my house, whatever. You can do this and you can do that. He also says that if you are feeling like you're having problems coming up with 10, then push yourself to come up with 15. The goal is not to have good ideas. The goal is to have ideas, period. And when you start doing this and you start doing this habitually, you'll start to see that ideas come to you more easily. It's like a habit. It's like a muscle that you end up building. So that is creativity denial. Let us talk about something that I call judgment dread. Now, some of this stuff, like I said, is really deep. I was suffering from it tremendously when I was 13 and 14. Part of what ends up happening is something called, or that ends up influencing it, is something called confirmation bias. You guys know what confirmation bias is? Yeah. Tell me.
Oh, I thought I just...
No, he was like, okay, he was like, that's all I can commit to. Okay.
You see around you things that you already have inside of you.
Yes, exactly. So it's when, I'm going to paraphrase, but thank you. That was awesome. So it's when basically you have a set belief on something, and then you basically look for confirmation of that outside of you in the world. So for example, if you feel like people don't like you, or if you feel like you don't know how to talk to people, or you're not, comfortable in crowds, then anytime somebody does something that confirms that, you're going to be like, see, it's true. Whereas there might have been somebody who was really nice to you. There may have been somebody who was smiling at you when you were walking by. You didn't notice because you thought, well, people don't like me, right? That's confirmation bias. So the problem with the inner critic is that if you have this set belief, this is going to be hard, I can't do this, I don't know enough of this, people don't trust my expertise or whatever, then you are going to look around and you're going to find confirmation of that around you. One thing that's really important with the fear of being judged is that people, again, think they're being judged. And so something that's a really good counter to that, have you guys heard of a kudos file? Has anybody heard of a kudos file? I feel like Pavneet probably has. No? Yes? Okay, so a kudos file is basically when anytime you get some kind of positive feedback, you get a really nice something from your manager, from a coworker in your email, somebody sends you a thank you note, you get a tweet on a blog post that you posted, and they're like, oh my God, I love this blog post, it totally changed my life. Whatever it is, you start gathering those up. And whenever you're having a down moment where your inner critic is just like, blah, 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 you suck, da, 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 you just go into your kudos file where you've saved all of this stuff where people say that you're great, and you just look through it just to remind yourself, okay, I'm all right. I'm okay, right? It's actually a helpful tool. I've seen it recommended in a lot of places. Another thing to do for judgment, a lot of times when people are afraid of being judged, like in my example, for example, then people start trying to hide. You start hiding yourself, you start toning yourself down, you stop sharing things that could actually be valuable for other people. My recommendation, stop hiding in plain sight. And one of the ways you can do that is by knowing how you're unique. It's what I call your uniqueness advantage. Thank you for laughing at that. I really appreciate it. I was like, somebody's going to like the unicorn, the cat riding a unicorn. So know your uniqueness advantage. There is nobody on the planet who is like you. Nobody's had your experiences, nobody has your knowledge, nobody has the unique combination of talents and skills that you have. Nobody. There is nobody who can do exactly what you can do. Period. That's just the facts. So instead of trying to hide because you're afraid that people are going to judge you, it's actually to your advantage to start letting out the ways that you are the only person who can be you, right? The only things that you can do, the things that you do amazingly, to start actually letting that out and sharing that with the world. Dealing with criticism is hard, okay? I'm saying that it is hard, but I'm also saying that it's a really important skill to have. I would like to tell you a story that is actually relevant to this. So, several years back, in my early 20s, I met this guy who was a waiter at a restaurant that I worked at, that I went to, ate at regularly, and I was just like totally taken with him. He was like tall, and he was funny, and he had a totally quirky sense of humor. And so we met up one night, totally felt like a date. I was like, oh yeah, it's on. And then I had this really cool experience that I wanted to share with him, and I called him a couple of days later after the date, and I was like, oh my God, Jim, this thing happened. And I was going on and on and on. And I was talking about it. And finally, when I was done, I was like, hey, what do you think? Are you there? And he was just like, you just went on and on and on. And I was like, what? And he was like, you were just talking so much. It was like it was the Denise show. And I was like, what? And I was totally gobsmacked. I was like, what? I thought we were trying. Okay, never mind. So suffice it to say, I did not talk to him after that. And it weighed on my mind after. I was like, do I really talk like that? I mean, do I not pay attention to people? Do I just run on and on about myself? Well, you know what? Maybe I do. But guess what? It turns out that is actually one of my talents. I love speaking. Obviously, I love having an audience and I love telling stories. He hit upon a grain of truth, but he hit upon a grain of truth that was actually insight into something that was actually valuable and something that was, I think, is a positive thing about me. So when people tell you criticism, it's really important to be open and be curious about what they're saying. One of the things that you can do is you can take notes. If you're getting feedback from a manager or somebody else that you work with or something, for example, start taking notes so that you are detached from what they're saying. You're not reacting to it. You're just getting information. Ask them questions about it. Ask them for more information. Ask them for recommendations. What do you think I could do to improve this? Right? And then the other thing that's really helpful to have an attitude that when you're doing this, you're actually saving time. You're actually learning without having to learn like the hard way. You're getting information, you're getting feedback. Some of it's going to be valuable. Some of it's going to be completely crap, and it doesn't have anything to do with you. It has to do with them. But if you can go through this process, have a little bit of a detachment, you can get the pearls of the information, and it may be helpful. It may be insight to something that can help you be even better at who you are than what you already are. So let's move on to high self-criticism. So one of the things that happens, one of the things that we get kind of trapped in is something called rumination. Do you guys know what rumination is? Yes? Okay, I heard a yes. That's good enough for me. So, for the people who don't know what rumination is, it's much like, is the llama chewing? It's not chewing. I'm like, how do I get this little llama to chew? There we go. So the llama, that's ruminating, okay? But that's basically what we do. It's the thing that we have in common with antelopes, cows, and llamas, is that humans also ruminate, but we don't ruminate with our food, we ruminate with our thoughts. And so if you've ever had a situation where your thoughts are cycling and you're just going back and forth, back over the same thought over and over again, especially a negative one, right? Oh my God, I should have done so-and-so. I can't believe I didn't do that. Why didn't I do so-and-so? I can't believe I didn't do it. Over and over and over, and it won't stop. You are ruminating, okay? So a lot of times ruminating doesn't feel like something that you can stop, but there actually is a really cool hack that you can use to stop rumination. And that is taking a squeeze ball in your non-dominant hand and squeezing it. So what it does is it forces your brain, because your brain, it's in your non-dominant hand, it forces your brain to use a part that it doesn't normally use, and it switches you out of rumination because you're trying to do this movement that you're not used to doing. Crazy, but true, right? So if you're right-handed and you're ruminating, squeeze the squeeze ball with your left hand. If you're left-handed and you're ruminating, squeeze it with your right hand. After a few minutes, you should actually be kicked out of the cycle and you can go on and do what you want to be doing. Cool, right? Yeah. I'm trying to give you guys stuff that you can take home and use immediately. Another thing with high self-criticism. So high self-criticism is basically when you're just constantly in the phase of always nothing you ever do is ever good enough. But everybody else is you're totally fine. This was great. And you're like, no, it should have been this and it should have been that and I should have known better and And that's how you work all the time. As a matter of fact, I have a friend who I've had to try to coach her out of it. She'll call and she'll be like, I'm so sorry I haven't called in so long. I'll be like, it's okay. She'll be like, I'm such a bad friend. I should do so-and-so more often. I was like, no. She's like, and I'm a bad daughter because I don't talk to my parents enough. I was like, really? It's really okay. Can you stop? Stop. Right? High self-criticism. So it's self-talk gone awry. So here's the interesting thing about self-talk, at least I think it's interesting. So we learn talking to ourselves is actually part of the cognition process. It's actually thought of as a subset of thinking. The thing is that a lot of times with self-talk, we have learned it from our parents or we've learned it from caregivers. So how many of you guys have kids? Okay. So have you seen, and even if you haven't seen kids, if you've seen kids, for example, like maybe like you've gone to pick up your kids at daycare or school or something like that, and you see a kid off playing with itself, and then the kid goes, "Ah, you're so stupid. Why did you do that?" You're like, "Oh my God, what just happened?" That child learned that language from a caretaker. Very interesting stuff. Makes you kind of think twice about what you're doing. And so a lot of the self-talk that we have is stuff that we actually learned. It's not something that we just, we weren't born like calling ourselves stupid, right? We learned that from someplace. It's self-talk. High self-criticism in my mind is self-talk gone awry. But the nice thing is that we can actually reboot our self-talk. So this is a technique that's used a lot by athletes and like high performance people, is that they have changed how they do self-talk. The first thing that they do is they don't say I. They refer to themselves in the third person. So, for example, LeBron James, before a game, will be like, okay, LeBron, this is what you're going to do. You're going to do so-and-so, you're going to go in hard, you're going to go for the basket, you're going to get 50 points, that's what you're going to do. He doesn't say, that's what I'm going to do. He distances himself and he's talking to himself as if a coach would be talking to him. A very supportive coach. Right? It's deep. And so, when you need to bolster yourself, when you need to pump yourself up, don't try to do it by saying I. Do it by saying you and using your name. Okay, Scott, this is what you're going to do. You're going to go into this meeting. You're going to present this stuff. It's going to be great. You're going to say all the stuff that you need to remember to say. You're going to be fine. It actually really helps. There's actually a whole range of studies that have shown that, for example, I think it was students at, I think it was Harvard or Ivy League school, basically were told to like do this self-talk before they took a test, and they actually did better on the test afterwards than the control group that was either told to talk to themselves with I or not say anything at all. So, really, really cool. Another thing you can do is to program your mind. So here's another cool thing. So kind of like the squeeze ball hand squeeze thing, you can actually use gesture and movement to change how you think. So for the people who came to my speaking workshop the other day, we did the power pose, but this actually goes beyond the power pose. There's a woman at the University of Chicago who does a lot of research with gesture and language and knowledge and learning, especially with children. And what she found is that when you teach children math and you teach it with a hand gesture, they will learn things faster and they will learn the computations faster. It's pretty amazing. So if you are on a board, for example, and you tell them when they subtract to do this, or to add when they do this, they will get it better than if you just have them stand still. Crazy. So you can reprogram your mind with your hands. Very cool. So if you're having a lot of yes, self-talk, critical self-talk. What you can do is you can use a gesture that we're all incredibly familiar with, which is to swipe left, right? So everybody knows Tinder, hot or not, delete, whatever it is, you all know swiping left means delete it. That is built into that is part of the lexicon now. Swipe left, swipe left, swipe left. So if you're thinking a really negative thought about yourself, you'd be like, oh my God, you're so bad at so-and-so. You could be like, delete. And say delete and swipe left. You can also do this and push it away. Nope, don't want it. Nope, keep going. All right? Anything that is a gesture that means no, don't want it, go away, will help. The other thing that you can do is you can actually then follow it up with something positive and do another gesture to anchor that. So you could be like, oh my God, you're so bad at so-and-so. You'd be like, delete. And then you'd be like, actually, I'm quite good at coming up with ideas. And like anchor it to yourself with another gesture. So you can actually start to reprogram how you think with that. Let's move on to deficiency anxieties because we've only got 20 more minutes. So, deficiency anxiety is really all around not enough, not enoughness, not good enough, not knowing enough, not having learned enough, not having done enough, not expert enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You get the idea. Here's the really interesting thing about this, and this is true with everything with the inner critic. Just because you're thinking something doesn't mean it's true. People are like, wait a minute, back up, put a pin in it. Just because you're thinking something does not mean it's true. It just means you're thinking that, right? We think all kinds of things that are patently untrue, and yet we take them as truth and we act upon them. Your thoughts aren't true. So, one of the things that you can do to counter deficiency anxiety, feeling that you're not enough and you don't know enough, etc., is to think like a scientist and to have kind of a scientific inquiry. So this is also kind of a mindful approach in some ways, right? Is to actually say, okay, I'm thinking that thought. Is that thought true? And to actually reframe. So you think, oh my God, I'm so bad at talking to new people. And then you can actually try to reframe it and say, am I really bad at talking to new people? And then you can start to think. That actually will shift your brain into thinking at different things. Confirmation bias, starting to look for instances that prove that actually bring that into question. And then you were like, well, actually, no. I was on the bus that one day and I started talking to the man who was sitting next to me. He was very nice. We had a nice conversation. And then you're like, oh, there was that other time. And then so you start to find things that actually refute it. So you can use that model where you think, I am blah, and then you follow it up immediately with, am I blah? And then you go through and you think about it. And you can even make a rubric where you have a thought that is probably untrue, or a situation that happened, the untrue thought, and then the thought that's actually probably closer to the truth, right? You just came out of a meeting and you thought, God, nobody liked any of the ideas that I had. And then you think, well, actually, I was talking to Jim afterwards and he said that one idea was really good. Okay, that's actually not patently true then, right? Think like a scientist. Also, there's something that I've called kind of a subset of deficiency anxiety, which I call proficiency anxiety, where people feel like, again, they're not good enough, they don't know enough, etc. So in order to build mastery, there's something that's called deliberate practice. Have you guys heard of deliberate practice? Everybody's like, nope. Great. I'm like telling you all kinds of new things then. So deliberate practice is something that, again, like athletes and things like that. So everybody's heard of the 10,000 hour rule, right? In order to be a master at something, you need to do 10,000 hours. Actually, that's not true. Unless you're trying to achieve this high level of mastery, like being a chess grandmaster or being like the next Tiger Woods. Did anybody see the pictures of him for the drunk driving? It's kind of sad, actually. God bless him. Yes. So you don't want to be the Tiger Woods drunk driving. You want to be the Tiger Woods who's a badass, who's like winning everything. Or the next Serena Williams, even more telling, won the Australian Open 20 weeks pregnant. What? Okay, anyway, Serena. So unless you're trying to get to that level of mastery, you don't need to do 10,000 hours. You can do it with much less. But what you do need to do is you do need to use deliberate practice. So what people who are musicians, etc., do is they practice up to the point of failure. They practice up to the point of where it's hard. They practice the hard thing. And then they do it over and over again. They practice up to the point of failure, and then they keep going to that point until they get over that, and then they get to another level of failure. Does that make sense? More or less, yes. So deliberate practice is something that you can use. If you're like totally stumped on something, get in there and try to like figure it out. Try to unravel it. And if you can't unravel it, put it aside, come back later, try to unravel it again. I assure you, the more and more you do it, and the more you do stuff that's peripherally around it, then you will get to the thing and you'll be able to like move past that point. Another thing that people suffer from with deficiency anxiety is something that I call originality anxiety. I've talked a lot at designer conferences and stuff like that, and one of the things that people seem to be very, very concerned with is that what they do isn't original. They're like, I'm a one-idea wonder. I'm just a copycat. Everything that I've done has been done before. Well, guess what? Yeah, there's nothing new under the sun, or there's nothing not that new. But so I feel like we can take that and can we use that? You know, Pablo Picasso says that good artists create and great artists steal. So steal like an artist and get your remix on. Has anybody seen the talk, Everything is a Remix? By Kirby Ferguson? Yeah. I highly recommend it. He talks about creativity and how all kinds of things are actually derivatives of other things, and that's okay. Things don't have to be amazingly, crazily original. You can do something that's a derivative of something else. And again, like I said, because there's nobody else like you in the world, your interpretation of whatever that thing is going to be different, right? So still, like, get to the point where get yourself comfortable. Like, I'm just gonna do, like, a lot of times I'll do something, I'll be like, you know what, I'm gonna do the easy thing, and then I'm gonna build on it later. Because it's not gonna be amazing and perfect and original and creative out of the box, maybe, but at least you have a starting point, right? Another form of the inner critic is something that I call comparison syndrome. And by the way, FYI, these crumpled up pieces of paper are things that I got from actual people. These are from talks that I've done, workshops that I've done, where people wrote down those fears about creativity, threw it across the room. I've gathered them all and used them as data points. And these are from actual people. These are what actual people have said. So, I'm not making this stuff up. So, comparison syndrome. Comparing yourselves to others. So the problem with comparison syndrome, as I see it, is that we aren't seeing ourselves clearly. We're so focused on what the other people are doing or what the other persons are doing that we can't see what we have to offer, and we kind of get lost in the sauce. So it doesn't help that we live in this like social media era, right? Where everybody's like posting everything to Instagram and Facebook, and it's like selfies gone bad, gone wrong. And like, has anybody seen on Instagram, like every now and then you come across one of those accounts where like it's just somebody posting selfies all the time, and then they try to say something philosophical and long underneath it, and I'm like, you just posted a picture of yourself, and then you're talking about, and then I just want to get to like a higher place and start to manifest, and you're just like, you just posted a picture of yourself, like really, like, okay. And then they're like, I've got 5,000 followers posting pictures of myself. Nothing but pictures of myself. I'm like, God bless you. Okay. But so we don't see ourselves clearly because we're inundated with all of this stuff. But there have been studies that show that when people share information, even when they're just talking, they tend not to share the negative information. They will only share what they perceive as positive. So even when you're talking to people who are just normal people in your life, you are not going to be getting a fair representation of what's actually going on in their lives and what's actually problematic. And so then we end up comparing ourselves to other people to things that actually aren't even real. So My recommendation is to know what throws you off. Is it Instagram? Is it Snapchat? Is it Facebook? Is it Twitter? Is it magazines? Is it, is it the 40 under 40 on Entrepreneurial Magazine? Is it like who's on the cover of Wired? Like, what is it that triggers you to get you into this downward spiral of comparing yourself to others and finding yourself lacking? My recommendation is to do a social media or a media detox for a certain amount of time. So to give yourself permission to not have to, or not give yourself permission, but to actually make it a mandate. I'm not going to check Facebook or whatever the thing is. I'm not going to read the newspaper. I'm not going to read Wired magazine. Whatever it is that trigger that puts you into that place. I did this a few years ago and I stopped reading my Twitter feed. I would only read direct messages and notifications like mentions. And I won't read my Twitter feed because I would just go into a tizzy when people are like, I'm speaking at so-and-so conference. I got this book deal. I'm going to be on so-and-so show. And I was like, I can't. And I just stopped. And it was like so freeing because it was like my brain didn't actually go to that place that it kind of normally goes. So give yourself permission, do a detox, see how that works. And see if that actually helps you get away from comparing yourself to others as much. Another thing that happens with comparison syndrome is that it's really based on envy. Now, there's a difference between envy and jealousy. So envy is when you see something else that somebody else has that you feel like should have been yours, right? That person's famous, but I actually should be famous. That person is having so-and-so's baby and I should be having his baby. Something like that. That person's rich and I should be rich, right? So it's something that you feel you have wrongfully gone to somebody, not you, right? Jealousy, on the other hand, is more about three people, right? It's when somebody else's attention is going towards somebody else and not you, right? So it usually has to do with you when you say you're jealous of your wife's sister because she hangs out with her sister, and talks to her more than she does to you. Okay, that's jealousy. That's not envy, right? So just to be clear about it. So envy, however, I think can be a really valuable tool and a very valuable thing to learn from. So, for example, if you're feeling envious of somebody, that could be telling you something that you actually want that you weren't in touch with and that you weren't willing to admit to yourself. So one recommendation that I have is to look at what is underneath your envy. If you're jealous because somebody got an award for being the best developer in the company, then maybe that means that you just really need recognition for your work. And so then that means you can set up ways you can talk to your manager or something. You can say, hey, I just really want to be recognized. Or you can get yourself on a project where you can be in the lead and you can get recognition for something. So it's really, really important to take envy and take it and learn from it instead of just sublimating it and trying to act like it's not there. You can also transform envy. So envy can be something where it's something when you're comparing yourself to other people and you're envious. It can be something that can be very paralyzing and kind of keep you stuck. But you can take it and you can transform it into something else and make it something that's positive. So what I recommend is then taking your envy and turning it into admiration. So really looking at the person and realizing that, again, just like you, just like everybody else, you're seeing what people call their highlight reels, right? When you see all their success, you don't see the failures, you don't see their own inner critic, you don't see all the hard things that they've gone through, you just see their success, and then you're basing your experience, you're taking your insides, and you're comparing it to somebody else's outsides, right? So recognize that they have an insides too, and like give them credit for having made the progress and done what they've done, knowing that if they've got some probably messy insides, just like everybody else does. Also, to take that and use them to be, instead of a role model, an opportunity model. And so something I've been saying a lot in the past week is being able to open up the field of the possible, right? Looking at that person and saying, oh my God, they did that? That's possible. I didn't think that that was possible with somebody that I knew, but that's possible. Maybe that's possible for me too, and that having that open up what you feel like you can accomplish yourself. And then the last thing that you can do is to actually give them kudos, so that you congratulate them, send them a card, send them a present, recommend their work to somebody else, rise them up. Actually, something called shine theory, where if somebody else shines that is in your circle, then they shine a light on you, and then you can shine a light back on them and on other people, and everything kind of goes outward, right? So you can do that with this admiration and beyond. So finally, I'm almost done. Finally, step into your creative power. So if you go through this process, you go through this kind of series of things that I outline in the book, and I talk about the exercises and stuff, you will get to a point where you will start to feel more confident and sure and have what's called creative confidence. Then you will have the ability to not just be your brilliance, to be the unique, wonderful, amazing person that you are that nobody else is on the planet, but that you can also start to share your brilliance. So one of the things, if you haven't started doing it yet, please start to share your expertise, to blog, to mentor, to teach, to present, right? To get out and to show all the things that, again, that you can do that nobody else can do, and to help other people come and step into their own creative power. Validate other people. Give them kudos. Tell them the things that you've always wanted to hear that you never heard enough of. Doc Norton is here, and he has this amazing presentation that he's done before. He hasn't done it in several years. It's called The Love Contagion. And he talks about how powerful it has been for him to have managers and mentors and everything actually give him validation, and how that bolstered him up and made him want to give the validation to other people. So give other people validation, recognize their efforts, recognize their creativity, and help them be the best person that they can be. So I told you that I was going to tell you what happened with the parts of my story. So even though Heather said that my mermaid looked like a frog, I went on to do other things artistically. When I left high school, my favorite high school teacher asked me to do a little map on the back wall of her room so that she could use it to teach from. And I ended up making a mural that was 10 feet by 20 feet that took me 250 hours to make over the summer between my senior year and going to university. And I'm very proud of it. It doesn't actually exist anymore, which I'm kind of heartbroken by, but it was a wonderful piece of work, and I felt really, really good about it. I did all the hand lettering, drew all the lettering, drew the compass rose, etc. And so even though this young girl made this comment about my artistic abilities, I didn't let that stop me. Even though the ages of 13 and 14, I hid on the end of the bench. When I went into high school, my friend, who was the other really tall girl on the team, actually ended up moving, and there was basically a vacuum. And I decided to go ahead and step into it because there was nobody else who could do it. And I ended up becoming a really, really strong basketball player, and I almost played volleyball in college at one of the top universities in the country that also had one of the strongest volleyball programs in the country. So I didn't let that stop me. And finally, despite the fact that my father, in his attempt to protect me, said that it was hard to get published, and I sublimated my desire to be a writer for years and years, I actually ended up, interestingly enough, having 2 serendipitous book contracts that I literally did not have to work for that fell into my lap. So know that people will say stuff to you, and it doesn't mean that it's true, and you don't have to make it true about yourself. So I hope through all of this, if you thought that banishing your inner critic was just like a pipe dream and it was never going to happen, you didn't think it was possible, and you didn't have the proper tools to do it, so you were like, forget about it. It's just going to be there. It's just going to be like in the room with me all the time. I'm going to be like, hey, Bart. Now you've got both things that you know that you've got, it's possible, and now you have more tools, right? And now you can create magic. I love that gif. So, in closing, I just want to say, the potential for greatness, I believe, is in all of us, all the time. It's a seedling, it's there, it's the potential, right? So do you want to have the inner critic kind of driving the bus and have you kind of snipping away at it constantly and have you hold yourself back? Or do you want to kind of fully grow into your magnificence, into what you potentially could be and fully actualize yourself? So with banishing your inner critic, just know that you do have the power. You have the power to take that step and to go beyond what you thought was possible. So what will you do with this power? That's it. Now, before I stop, I want to say that today is actually the day that my father died 15 years ago. And so I wanted to dedicate this talk to him because he was a really amazing person and I miss him a lot. And then the other thing, is that I have copies of my book here, and I have 5 copies, and I was going to give them out to anybody who wants to ask me a question. Yeah, she's like, me! I have a question.
I was going to buy your book, so.
Yeah. Hit me.
You were talking about the mastery and always pushing to the pain limit. But then I tried to do that, but then you're always failing.
Yeah. You're failing, but it's like, so there's something called the flow channel. And the flow channel is basically where you're at this kind of nexus point of challenge and skill. And so there's going to be points kind of like, I kind of think about deliberate practice kind of like just going just a slightly bit outside the flow channel. So that slight bit where your skill doesn't quite meet the challenge, but to get back into the flow channel, you just kind of knock down the challenge a little bit, and then you build up your confidence, and then you can try it again. So if you ever see a graph of the flow channel, it goes like this, right? Skill, challenge, flow channel through the middle of it. So just know that you can kind of go up, get to that point, go back into flow, go up, get to that point, go back into flow, right? And that it's kind of this dance. Yeah. Yay, you're welcome.
There we go.
Yay. All right. Who else? Yes.
I'm thinking it's more about keeping in the space where you're kind of semi-confident. And how many hours do you think you need to be really good?
This guy, actually, the book that I was referencing said 20 hours. Actually, yeah, but like 20 hours of deliberate practice, not 20 hours of like noodling, right? But like 20 hours of deliberate practice where you keep kind of challenging yourself, getting to that point of failure, and then kind of getting up to a higher point of failure and going down that. Yeah. I'll get it to you, I'm like feeling lazy. Who else? I saw all you guys. Wait, is there anybody in the back that I'm like totally missing? Okay, hold on. I saw you guys. She's like, yes. Okay, yeah, and there. Okay. I'll get back here. Yes. Excellent, thank you. Yes, that's a great question. She asked, if you don't criticize yourself, will you be able to improve? There's a whole lot of studies that show that self-criticism actually impedes your progress and does not actually help you improve. And a lot of people have been taught that that's how they do it. That's how you do it. You crack the whip, and then you go because you don't want to get hit with the whip. But that self-compassion and self-kindness actually helps you move forward faster than self-criticism does. excellent question. You get a book. I saw you there. Yes.
That was actually my question. Is it actually good to manage your inner critic completely, or is it good to just a little bit of inner critic that keeps the self-inflicted?
That's kind of what she asked. So he asked if is important to have a little bit of an inner critic to keep yourself in check. Personally, again, I feel like, okay, here's an answer to that question. So there's a part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that judges, that evaluates, that kind of looks at things all the time and adjusts your behavior. When that part of your brain goes silent, that's when you're most creative. That's when you're able to go into a flow state. So my answer to that is I actually don't think the inner critic keeps you in check. Like, why do you need to be kept in check? Like, why do we need to be like, what? We're supposed to be trying to like be like this. We don't need to like somebody like, nope, down, like all the time, right? So I actually think that the inner critic it's going to be there all the time. And let's not act like it's, like, oh, it's magic and it's gone. But I don't think it's very beneficial. It was beneficial at one point in time when you were younger and trying to like protect yourself from threats. But now that we're older, we can kind of react to things differently. Yeah.
Yeah, where should you actually start? What's sort of a good place to start with all of these?
What's a good place to start? Thank you so much, you guys. You were great. Thank you for coming.